I'm in Toulouse in southern France, and I'm just back from a visit, partly to a course in Torino, but also a visit to the Bosnian pyramids in Bosnia, obviously.
Ah.
And that was quite an exciting adventure, you might say. Bosnia is sort of a country you don't, at least I never thought I would go there, but I did.
Our friend Sam Simir Osmanagic, did you meet with him? And what's your overall impression, by the way, of the pyramids over there, Carl?
Well, I think, first of all, I think he's done a tremendous job, a good job in arguing strongly in favor of his hypothesis. I still think there are a few question marks. It's not an easy, immediate answer, so to speak, but I think the weight of evidence leans in favor of the idea that they are man-made, and which is really very interesting and fascinating. To me, they said that people don't want to recognize this because that would mean that they would have to rewrite all of history and so forth. But I don't really see that. To me, it just would be an addition. I have no problem with the fact that they might be 10,500 years. I even think that is quite reasonable, and I don't see any reason why Bosnia wouldn't have any pyramids either. But there are geological issues that I think still needs to be addressed before we can be completely certain about the nature of these pyramids. But on the surface, there's no question, especially the large one, the Pyramid of the Sun, and Samir, he showed us around to the various archaeological trenches and so forth, we were there at the same time with a team from National Geographic, and they asked questions that were critical, as you might expect, and he answers very well, but it still remains this, it's not to me 100% clear case yet.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Robert Schock and some of the other geologists have posed, I guess, the same kind of questions. If some parts are natural or whatnot, and some parts I know is apparently underground as well. Did you get a chance to go into some of the cavities underneath that they have there as well?
Yeah, the tunnel system is quite complex, and but I don't think it adds very much. Well, there was some interesting petroglyphs, you might say. Some not writings, but symbols that seemed indisputably human in origin, and that was interesting to see in these tunnels. And they continue, they work hard, and it's very, there's a bunch of volunteers there, and it's made in a very good spirit, and they seem very happy to contribute, the people that are doing work there.
Absolutely. Interesting hearing more about that from your perspective as well. I hope to go down there myself at one point and take a look, but more work needs to be done. That's what I've understood from the situation as well. Now, Carl, let's shift over a little bit then and begin to focus a little bit on your work. We obviously have the end of the Mayan calendar, according to your calculation here, coming up on the 28th of October this year, 2011. We've also entered into the 5th night of the 9th wave. Why don't you give us a little bit of an update, if you will, on basically where we are and everything? There's so much that have unfolded, Carl, since we last talked with you. Chaos, basically, in various parts of the world. We've had huge earthquakes. We've had this issue of something I know that you've been writing and talking about in terms of both the comets, or Comet Honda and Elenin. Give us a bit of an update, if you will, Carl, on what's going on currently.
Yeah, well, I think you and I talked before the beginning of the 7th day of the galactic underworld, which would place it somewhere around October of 2010. I don't know. Do you have any immediate recollection of
that? Sounds
what?
about right, Carl. I'm going to look in the archive, but let's go with that for now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Meaning that the ninth wave had not started, and as some of you, the listeners, may know, the Mayan calendar is a system of 9 waves of evolution, and the ninth wave is the one with the highest frequency of change. And it's the top level, the highest level of consciousness in the cosmic evolution scheme. And this one was initiated on March 9th of 2011. Then you might say there was a tremendous amount of events happening at this time period that you would call the seeding period of any wave. In other words, the first time period you'd call a day, an Oaxac Lahun Kin in this case, an 8-day period. On March 9th, the very beginning date, there was this huge solar flare. On March 11th, there was the huge earthquake in Japan, and followed then by the nuclear crisis in Japan and the beginning of the war in Libya, and everything of this taking place against the background of revolutions of a kind in growing in several countries in the Arab world. That was a starting point, and it was a time when there was so much happening that the magazine Newsweek simply on its cover wrote "Apocalypse Now."
Yep.
Basically, it was more than the regular media could handle, or any person could handle, in terms of where to place our attention. You know, usually or typically we follow one thing or maybe two things that are the main focus on international media. But this was just too much, and it was really then a very evident beginning of the wave that had a higher frequency, meaning that more things are compressed in a certain time period than ever before. Now, since then, many developments have continued. Throughout this ninth wave, there has been an increase of all kinds of natural disruptions, earthquakes, and the like. Also, there's been a growing and continuing economic destabilization. You might say that, especially in Europe, and especially in Southern Europe, there's sort of been a kind of revolution going on, or that might be a little bit too strong a word, but a sort of a constant movement of protest.
Well, absolutely. Look at Greece, Carl. I mean, that's definitely a revolution down there.
Yeah, it is. And then sometime this spring, I predicted that some of the most disruptive waves in this particular wave, or now I put it wrong, some of the most disruptive time periods in this particular wave would be the dates. And I had a sense that especially the fifth day, which started July 31st, would bring a serious destabilization to the world's economy. And this is what happened, you might say. The whole discussion around the American debt ceiling, and especially the political ramifications of this. It's what shall I say? the big nations cannot be governed the way they used to be. And the same is happening in the European Union, especially, which it's never been centralized in the same sense, but it has been aiming to be centralized, and it just seems to be going in the other direction. That if anything, the political structures and hierarchies are falling apart, are no longer operating, and it's really up in the air whether not only the euro will survive, but actually the European Union, because this is really acutely happening in Greece, and it's not that simple that you could say, okay, let Greece leave the eurozone, because according to the statutes of the European Union, if you do that, you'll have to leave the European Union, because it means that you're actually breaking the treaty that you have negotiated.
Yes, and also I want to mention about that, Carl, because it wasn't too long now ago since UBS, the Switzerland Union Bank of Switzerland, I think UBS stands for, came out with this report basically detailing the problem with the eurozone, and the fact that it looks like it's closer right now than ever to some kind of collapse. But they also detail, interesting enough, just as you mentioned, that an exit by some of these countries. I know that Germany, who's been carrying a lot of the weight, obviously, for other nations in Europe, are seeking to go out, but because of the nature of the legislation, they would end up paying even more money, obviously, to go out. So the question is, this is what's going to happen. But what do you think that this is evidence of? Because what we're seeing in the political realm is an aim or an attempt towards consolidation of power, centralization. But the more they do this, the more these organizations seem to be failing. What do you make of this, Carl?
Well, that's what I had expected when the ninth wave would be coming. That on the surface, it looks like just a period of increasing chaos and the destabilization of the old ways. And sometimes it's happening from natural disturbances, and sometimes it's happening because of economic constraints. But the ultimate driving force of this, as far as I can say, is this shifting of human consciousness that is taking place and creating a unity consciousness, like a polarity shift of consciousness that is going on. And what is not consistent with this incoming new frame of consciousness is these kind of hierarchies, whether they are political or economic, which are by their very nature, they are not transparent the way they operate today. And that's, transparency is one of the major characteristics of the incoming wave, to create in people transparency. And this obviously is not consistent with that. There is all kinds of sort of secret things going on in the world. And I'm not talking about this sort of regular conspiracy stuff that people are that are more the New Age version of it. I'm just talking about what is obviously secrets in banking and in politics and so forth. Mm-hmm. And this is what's happening. And these structures had, basically we have inherited them from a long time ago, maybe 5,000 years. They have been sort of developing stepwise according to the long count, the sixth wave of the Mayan calendar system, and now they no longer function because of the disruptive effects of the new incoming wave.
So what does this mean, do you think? Does this mean that the way we have been handling both government and banking, economy-wise, that needs to be reformed, or do you think, Carl, that we're looking at a total collapse of these systems, and then we're going to have an alternative version of these coming up on the side? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think it will be a total collapse, actually, well, I don't know exactly what I mean by total collapse, but I don't think the systems will be reformed.
Right.
Well, you would have to make a detailed analysis to really answer that question, because some aspects of it might be reformed, but others simply have to be replaced. And the trick is, though, that, or the paradoxical thing in a sense is that until this collapse, there's really very little work done to replace it or create alternatives. If you would today start to create an alternative when the monetary systems are still in place, it would be really like a direct attack on the way society works, and it would probably just bounce back and create conflict and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It's only if there is a real collapse that people would not only have to, but also get the true opportunity, I believe, to create other ways of relating especially in the economic and political arenas.
Yeah. So what do you see would be fitting, if I can put it that way, to replace this system? If there are certain parameters that you mentioned in the terms of the last creation cycle or level, if you will, that we're in right now, how would it have to be structured for it to not go through the same type of collapse that we've seen with this system, do you think, Carl?
Yeah, well, they, as I said, they are inherited from old dualist frames of consciousness. And dualism has a tendency always to create inequalities, imbalances. And so, for instance, take a very simple example here. Part of all the natural disasters we've been seeing recently are, I think, our own creations. They are backlashes to our ignorance of the climate, for instance. I'm not saying that all of them are, but some of them are.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are a response in that sense to the constant growth of the human economy that's been going on for a very long time, and a growth that is sort of cancerous in many ways, because it takes away the natural environment in which our societies need to live. Now, why is this constant growth? The politicians will be very happy over when they say, "Oh, we have growth. That's good." Well, it's not at all necessarily good. Certainly not for the environment. But the reason is that we have a system of banking, especially, which is based on paying interest, meaning that anyone who wants to start some kind of a business or do any economic activity has to go to the bank and loan money and pay interest. The fact that he needs to pay, or she needs to pay interest, means exactly that it's necessary for this business not to just be a stable, happy business that operates on some kind of good basis, but it has to grow.
Yeah.
It has to. Otherwise, you can't pay the interest. So we're living in a system with forced interest. And this forced interest, it comes out of a dualist approach to to the world that we have inherited, and which is really ultimately what threatens the existence of our planet.
It's a predatory system, and since it's a debt-based system as well, Carl, that means that once we print money that we put in circulation, or if that means basically we end up in a situation of debt to begin with. So you need to work to pay off that debt. So you create more money in that sense. And when you create more money, you create more debt. It's a circle, and I believe that now when we're at this level, I mean, it might have worked in the time of Babylon or later in the smaller European communities around the world, around the Middle Ages or something like that. But now when it's a global system, Carl, it needs a constant injection of new things, new money, if you will. And therefore it's become predatory, and that's why people even speculate that the actions in Libya is not only connected to oil, but the fact that this is about grabbing another nation to put them back into the system of the Western monetary system, basically, because it needs it to survive. So the basic idea, I guess, is that it eventually, at the end of the day, unless we go out into space and colonize other worlds or take over other planets, it's going to fail at the end of it, because it can't, as you say, Carl, it can't just continue to grow and grow and grow. So to be clear, I guess you're saying that an economy based on a system which doesn't have interest and a fiat currency at the heart of it, that is a system that potentially would survive.
Yeah, I think so. It has to be done that way. And the good thing about it is that it wouldn't force growth. It wouldn't, if you could have a business that doesn't grow, it just, stays the way it is, then that works perfectly fine. But it wouldn't force this constant, what should I say, tearing down of the natural environment.
Right, you need constant production of the items that you produce or what have you, and so a lot of things would obviously change because of that. We would go in a different into a different era, basically, because we would be maybe in a situation where we actually could develop products that actually last, instead of actually breaking down for the sake of us just continue to producing and continue to buy new ones all the time, or these updates we see constantly. So it's a terrible waste, if you will, in the system that we're in, because we constantly need to get new things to feed into the economy. But so that's one aspect, obviously, the monetary, and hopefully then, as you mentioned, Carl, there's a kind of an organic, more natural and more humane, if you will, system of economy that could arise out of the ashes of this old system that we're seeing. What is going on in some of the other aspects, do you think, if we talk about, I don't know, maybe politics, and later as well, I want to get your take on Elenin and Honda that I know you mentioned before, but where do you think we're going in terms of politics, Carl?
Yeah, I think there is, it's just becoming more difficult for to rule centralized nations the way they have been. Ultimately, I doubt that there is a need for governments in the sense that we become used to it, in the sense of a government of a nation, so to speak. It's really something that has come out of a long-standing competition between so-called nations, which are really arbitrary units. They are shaped by a certain frame of consciousness, the national underworld, the sixth wave, as I talk about. But there's really no reason a priori that the world should be organized primarily in these structures we call nations. That I think in the medium term, we will see that there is no real need for these, and that's good in a sense. In the sense that usually it is those structures that are creating wars or starting wars. But of course, there is always the worry that if these structures fall apart, it's really very important that they do so in an as peaceful way as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because there are several examples in the world, like Somalia or Afghanistan or even Pakistan, where the national structures have been have collapsed because of external wars, especially, or violent conflicts. And when this happens, there is a serious risk that the countries do not easily reach harmonious stabilization. But if it's peaceful, then the risks are much less. And you may notice that in Egypt or Tunis, there still hasn't turned into any kind of violent or chaotic situations, and that has to do with the fact that these revolutions were peaceful. So it's an important distinction to be made there.
This would entail that consciousness, as you said, would need to be changed or shifted, as you say, from the point of view that mankind then needs to begin to trust in, if you will, in something else, if that is indeed still a part of consciousness, that we need to rely on something, if you will. Is that nature / creation? I mean, people are, from this old point of view, of this old consciousness, that, if you will, are terrified, perhaps, of the idea of not having a government to protect us, to take care of us, for security and things like that. I don't know how detailed you are in terms of your theories about this, if this means that we would no longer have, police and fire departments or what have you, or if that's still a part of the picture. It's just about this idea of ruling people in the way people are being ruled right now, that would basically not be in existence anymore. But in any regard, Carl, maybe you can just talk about what you would see, what would change in the perception of reality or the consciousness of people, because we have to rely on something, don't we?
People in general, for instance, they think that they are paid by their employers. If I don't see it that way. I think fundamentally people are paid, if that's a word, by divine providence. But you have to, at some point, take the risk of trusting divine providence to find out that it's not the employers that pay you, but you're actually being cared for by divine providence. Does that communicate?
I think I understand what you're saying. If we look at it from the point of view of insurance, I think people can understand that. People who basically are afraid of things that have not yet happened go to a company, pay them money to get in insurance. What if we don't do that anymore? In other words, we save that money and do other things with it, spend our joyous time at the movie theaters or what have you, whatever, and basically trust on the fact that you're not in a position where these things will be lost, or you won't be robbed, or your house won't burn down. But even if they are, even if you do end up in that situation, that you rely on your ability to actually reconstitute these things and take it as an opportunity to rebuild your life, actually not looking at it from the point of view of being negative, but actually positive. Is that a fair kind of comparison to make, Carl?
Yeah, well, it is, except that I think this is sort of you might say a mechanism of creation that is inherent, that not that it always works out, but that if you learn to trust it, it will serve you enough to get by.
Yeah.
And I think that will not stop. That care by divine providence, as I would call it, that will not stop.
So in other words, there is a force, a presence, if you will, an awareness in nature and creation that is geared towards making sure that life is continuing. And if you learn to trust this, if you learn to rely on this, it will provide you with the means so that you can continue your life. Is that what you're saying, Carl?
That's what I'm saying. You know, I was just asked to review a book by Lulu Macy, and I don't think the title is hers, but you probably heard it before. It's do what you like, the money will follow.
Yeah.
And it's something like that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is this principle applied to a more global change in the system.
So what you're also talking about, Carl, is a leap of faith. We have to end up on the brink a little bit to actually begin to test this out. We're being kind of pushed out of the nest, if you will, a little bit right now.
That's a good metaphor. Yeah.
So that's very, very interesting, and of course, what we're seeing right now, though, currently is a complete chaos, a complete failure in many regards, while other people speculate that this is exactly according to plan to consolidate power again as a means and as an attempt for the geopolitical sphere or the people in that kind of environment to try to claim hold and control again of the system that is failing in one way. How quick do you think that this will go? We've talked about this before. We've talked about these ideas of kind of a delay in the implementation of the Mayan calendar, that we're seeing certain things kind of unfolding a little bit afterwards. The intention is there first, and the first imprint, but then on our level, it takes a little bit of time for this to play out, right, Carl?
Yeah, it has, and it's been drawn out. It is being drawn out, and maybe it's been a little bit more drawn out than I had expected. And who knows? Maybe just when the calendar, shortly before the calendar comes to an end in October of this year, maybe that's sort of when there is this kind of a tipping point in the situation, and from there. It may be the case that it's from there that the whole new world will have to be created. And then, I think at that point, time will lose its meaning. It will not be the kind of measurable time that we have been used to. And so whether you talk about 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, it's not time the way that it has been.
Yeah.
It's something.
Comets Honda and Elnin, I heard you mention that in the context of the Hopi prophecy of the blue star, the Kachina. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's I wrote an article saying that I suspected that the comet Yelanin actually then was the blue star of the Hopi prophecy. And it's a couple of weeks ago, it was shown by NASA that the comet actually was blue, meaning that one of the main criteria for this to happen seems to be met. Another is that it would be coming closest to the Earth right when the calendar comes to an end, which seems to be a remarkable synchronicity. What has been talked about in the past week or two is then some people saying that the comet is disintegrating.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And I still don't think we've heard the last of it, because there are also counter ideas being proposed. Possibly then, maybe then it could have mean that my idea here was wrong, but it's not necessarily the case. I never thought of this as anything else than a messenger for the completion of the cycle. It's possible that it could also have some kind of a direct physical effect of the Earth, but that's something I have never sort of proposed to be the case. but it might be exactly that, Luke, Katrina. And in 2 weeks from now, I think it is September 23rd to 25. I will at the event called the Cosmic Convergence. I will be gathering at a gathering in here in France in a peace festival close to the city of Troyes, and there will not only I be, but also Dr. Imoto from Japan, and a couple of Mayan elders and a couple of Hopi elders. And so it will be very interesting to see how what plays out in this event. What will these, for instance, what will these elders, especially the Hopi elders, say about this? Because it is then at the time when the comet Yelenin was, at least originally, thought to pass between the Earth and the Sun, sort of giving us an experience of being part of a cosmic scenario, if nothing else. That seems to be the only certain thing we can say at this point, that it should give us an enhanced experience of cosmic belonging. And so hopefully then we will see a little bit more. But this event, it doesn't actually rely on or hinge on the Yelenin presence as the blue star, because these events, I think they should always be done so that they encourage people to do what's truly in their power, no matter whatever the outer circumstances. And if anybody sort of thought that this Yelenin would sort of be something by itself acting on the planet, then this disintegration might be a signal to them, because after all, it is about us, and we are, as the Hopi would say, we are the ones we have been waiting for. But it's also that all this transformation, in the final analysis, it is all about us. Even though it looks like sometimes that it may be so-called earth changes or natural disasters or economic collapses or so forth, in the final analysis, I think we can see that it's all about different processes that are aligned with and furthering this transformation to unity consciousness that the world needs now, simply. Not only because it needs it, but because that's part of the cosmic plan.
I'm going to link this up as well, the festival that you mentioned, Carl, and I think if I pronounce the name right, it's Lothlorien Festival. It might be a French accent to that. I don't know, lothlorienfestival.com. I'm going to have that link up there in case we have some listeners around Europe and around the area that want to attend, obviously.
Thank you. Yes, it is actually as far as I've been told, it's actually something from the Lord of the Rings.
Sounds like it, yeah, exactly. I was going to say.
And since I'm not familiar with that terminology, I haven't been using that term.
That's probably, that's probably why I said Lothlorien then, because it sounds exactly like something out of Lord of the Rings. Yes. All right. So can we talk a little bit about, I want to get a little bit more in detail in terms of unity consciousness, what that is. What does that mean, Carl? What do you expect the changes, the implementation of this to be like?
Yeah, well, one word you can use for the same thing, I think, is the word transparency, complete transparency of us as individuals, and then of course also then the various kinds of social and economic structures that we are part of, and transparency then means not only it doesn't mean, as far as I can tell, that you're sort of talking about yourself all the time, but it means that you don't hide things. There are no hidden compartments in your mind, and that is one aspect. So it's sort of working to make things transparent. That's one aspect of unity consciousness.
Is that transparent to yourself or to all others, Carl?
I think it's both.
Ah. What about, is this connected with the ideas of kind of a telepathy type of consciousness, that there is, in other words, an open channel, if you will, almost communication-wise, or how do you see this kind of unfolding?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. But then it's also a consciousness of light, and what that means is that I think it's that we refrain from expressing the dark side of this dualist consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's another way of taking it, of sort of meaning that you surrender the right to respond to negativity with negativity, for instance, and these are things. I think it's an important part of it, but it's also, I think, it's actually a transition to a cosmic consciousness, and what that means is that it's sort of the final transcendence of all these kind of more limited grouped belongings that we have identified with. I talked earlier about nations, but it's also other kind of identities, that it will all be sort of surrendered to the overall cosmic consciousness. So these are a couple of cuts, you might say, to try to narrow in on what this might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the concepts of collectivism and individuality, are these things that will change, or will these in one form or another kind of still be there, do you think, Carl?
What things will be there?
Collectivism and individuality. We see these as two different things today, at least in the Western world. It depends on where you are in the world. We understand that too. There's quite a bit of a difference in some of the Eastern ways of dealing with the individuality. There you might belong more to the to the tribe, or a little bit more to the society at large. But in Western line of thinking, we still have venerated individuality quite a bit. Is that something that is eroding or is going away, do you think?
I suppose that well, I think there will always be individuality and there will be collectivity, but maybe that they will not be seen as much as opposites as they are now.
Interesting. So let's see here. What are we looking at next upcoming? Obviously, we mentioned the Cosmic Convergence here, September 23rd up to the 26th. What happens after now here then, after the 28th of October, when the calendar runs out, Carl? I know we've talked before about the idea of starting anew, if you will, in terms of counting. How has that developed, that particular project for you?
Well, I tend to think that time will be experienced very differently, and I can only guess as to how the calendar will influence things. But my sense is that for instance, the classical traditional sacred 260-day calendar with its varied energies, 260 distinct energies. That's something that will continue so it will not just be an amorphous nothingness or everythingness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will continue. It may even be that the waves will continue ad infinitum. But and this it's for me at least it's impossible to tell which is the case. But it would be, let me say this.
Yeah.
It would mean that as it is now, these waves has this kind of a compelling direction. In other words, they drive evolution on each level from seed to mature fruit. And there is no negotiation to be done with this. We, as human beings, we're simply compelled to be part of these processes or be left behind. And but I do think that these sort of linear evolutionary processes that have been driving evolution up until now, they will come to a close. We won't have that experience. And that might be experienced as a great freedom, I think. A great freedom if that happens, and I think so.
Interesting. So, I mean, there still will be then, I guess, individual energies pertaining to each day, but there is, as far as I know, then no framework measuring these or aligning yourself to these as has been previously with the Mayan calendar, right? Because this is something that you and others, related to the work that you've done, have been measuring. You could go in on various websites or look at the calendars that you put out and get the specific vibration / energy of the day, if you will. But there's no framework for this after we passed the 28th of October this year. Is that correct?
That's what I would say. Yes.
So that's interesting. So that means that the Mayans were they detailed this. They managed to map this and put this in calendar format. But this is not something that we can continue to do now, or you don't have the knowledge to proceed this process?
Well, I don't feel I have the certainty yet to say how it exactly is going to play out.
Okay. Yeah, I see. So that means, in other words, it means we might be in, as it always is, of course, we might be in for big changes or a continuation of the way that things are, and then we're looking at a slower implementation. Is there any big node points or other aspects as we lead up to the end of the calendar now that are worth mentioning or like kind of heads up type of events or points, if you will, Carl?
Yeah, well, just the other day started the 6th day of the 9th wave, and I think it's October 10th that the 7th day begins. And these are shift points again, and they are, in a sense, I'm sure they will also sort of, on one level, they will increase the chaos, but every step in this wave has increased the chaos. And
yeah.
What I think is that in the 6th and the 7th days, there will be more of a feeling of alternatives being created, not only tearing down the old, but also what we talked about earlier, the other side of the new things, new ways of relating. And we should, be very realistic and see that the economic system it's fundamentally a way of relating between people. We tend to talk about relationships, and then we think about man, woman, and all that kind of stuff, the emotional aspects of it. But the basic frameworks of relationships in our society, in other words, what decides what each one of us does as the main activities. We talk about this as doing our work. And that is determined by the monetary system, and the relationships that, these relationships are determined by the economic system. And so if there is a collapse there, it would also mean that the relationships between human beings will be very fundamentally impacted and changed.
Yeah, because it is an exchange of energy nonetheless. I mean, the money represents something, although it's a kind of if you will, a fake system, or a system that relies on things which are not bound to the natural world, since we've given up on gold standards and things like that. But it still represents an exchange of energy. But this would obviously entail, I mean, if we go through a full blown out collapse, Carl, that would entail that people would have to start cooperating on a different level, perhaps, in terms of their relationships with neighbors, or trades with people who are more close by, at least in the beginning, right?
Yeah, not only in the beginning. I mean, it would be the birth of a cooperative system, even though, as always, there is likely to be a lot of sort of individualistic responses, that ego responses, but what belongs to the future is the kind of new collaborative relationships that emerges from these collapses.
Now, in the past, in your books, Carl, you've been detailing things that I found really fascinating in terms of technology and various forms of material progress that humanity has done on certain points in time, and these new technologies have been basically come online at these important points, or as these shifts occur that you've mapped. Is there anything similar, or something now leading up even to 2011 that could mean progression in terms of maybe energy, or a new form of communication? Or will things remain the way they are, do you think, or will we look at some kind of revolution technology-wise as well, do you think?
I don't expect any revolutions in technology in this short time period. Of course, you're sort of asking about free energy and so forth.
Sure.
I think that is for the time after the end of the calendar. I think the cosmic plan is designed in such a way that only those that go through to a collaborative system, only they will be given, if you like, these new technologies.
So this, in one level, that's pertaining still to the economic system, because it's been speculated that certain types of technologies have been kept out of the mainstream for the fact that it's been geared primarily in an economic fashion. There's been economic interest to keep certain things off the market, if you will, because it would destabilize the economic system from their point of view way too much. But if this collapsed, that means that a potential release or an enabling would happen in these types of markets then, right?
Yes, that is right. And you mentioned one very clear example of this earlier. The many products that are built with a built-in mechanism for their destruction, really.
Basically, yeah, exactly.
That's long-lived, and so this is a clear example of how technology is organized in a way that it's not optimal, and it's really just a function of these economic systems that we talked about.
Exciting times indeed, Carl Johan Calleman. How rapidly things have unfolded, though. I remember, getting alerted to your work, I think back in 2001 or 2 or something like that, And it's just amazing how quickly things have gone. Obviously, as a way to kind of begin to conclude or wrap things up then for this time, Carl. Again, I guess I want to ask you if this is how you thought that things would unfold, you know, as you've been working with this now throughout the years and detailing and mapping the different layers of creation and incoming energies. Has it been as you've expected it, or has it been a lot of unknown variables still that has upset things, or as you mentioned before, maybe there is an expectation from the point of view of the past that things would have unfolded quicker by now, but in some sense they haven't. There's still some form of the old world obviously lingering still, correct?
Yeah. Well, I think there are cases where you know, in some of my expectations have not been or I haven't been able to have the sense when I started maybe 18 years ago with this to know how things would unfold. And in some cases, it's, you know, I for instance on the rhythm of the ninth wave, I vacillated in both of my earlier books about, you know, what is the actual time period of a day or night in this ninth wave. And so in certain ways, I'm very proud. I think what really has held up is the end date, and also that I was not too late with sort of saying that the ninth wave will be a 13 times 18 day. But you know, if I go back to when I started to think about these matters in the early 90s, I did not think that this ninth wave, I thought much more would be happening in the galactic underworld, in the eighth wave. Mm-hmm. And as it looks now, that was a very weak wave in a sense. It was not a very powerful wave. And there's a guy, Robert Gunn, who has found some good comparisons to why this wave was weaker and not so powerful. And what has happened then is that that was a weak wave, and then now it just feels like everything is happening at a much speed, a higher speed than most people had expected, including myself. I might have known the rhythm as a theoretical thing, but in the past couple of months, I've had to review my own notions of this end time scenario in significant ways, and just because of the very power and the very speed of rhythm of this ninth wave.
Interesting. So we could still obviously be in for quite a bit of change then. Again, if there's a delay of the eighth wave and the ninth wave is something that might come in sooner. Yeah. But again, the closer we get up to the 28th of October, the quicker and more rapid now the succession of the night and day energies are going to come as well, right? So there's a certain point here. Is it a 7-day period just before the end where we have night and day energies? Is that correct, Carl?
Now I'm not sure I followed that the last thing.
Okay, but there is a last phase, I guess, of the step, the creation cycle that we enter into just a few days before the calendar ends. Isn't that correct?
Oh, I don't. Yeah, of course you can do. I'm sure you can subdivide it also into shorter phases. I'm sure you can do that, and sometimes you hear people sort of expecting that there are even more waves that will be activated. And so something like that might be going on. I wouldn't want to speak with certainty myself on it, but something like that might be going on.
All right, interesting. We'll just have to see, Carl, how this unfolds, obviously, and what happens in the days, months, and then consequently years to come. But obviously, as we've been detailing, this is not about the end at all, but actually about the beginning, I guess, of a new new time that we're entering into, basically. And is there any final thoughts then you want to leave us with here before we wrap things up with this time, Carl?
Well, it's the final thoughts are that I guess two things. The cosmic convergence is really about this, making this kind of commitment to unity consciousness, and so it's I just want people to consider this. It's not something that you can tell people that this is what they should do.
Sure. Yep. Because
it's the only reason it has power is if it's free will and it's a stand that people take. And I do think that it will be like the last chance, more or less, to make that stand. So whether people are aware that this is happening at that time or not is maybe not so important, but it will be really a time then to choose, to make the choice. And that's one thing. And the other thing then is really to sort of listen, paradoxically you might say, listen very closely as to what information you get for yourself, where you should be and what you should do.
All right, absolutely. Calleman.com, that's your website, Calleman.
Frequency of change. And it's the top level, the highest level of consciousness in the cosmic evolution scheme. And this one was initiated on March 9th of 2011. Then you might say there was a tremendous amount of events happening at this time period that you would call the seeding period of any wave. In other words, the first time period you'd call a day, an Wahak Lahun Kin in this case, an 8-day period. On March 9th, the very beginning date, there was this huge solar flare. On March 11th, there was the huge earthquake in Japan, and followed then by the nuclear crisis in Japan and the beginning of the war in Libya, and everything of this taking place against the background of revolutions of a kind in growing in several countries in the Arab world. That was a starting point. And it was a time when there was so much happening that the magazine Newsweek simply on its cover wrote, "Apocalypse now."
Yep.
Basically, it was more than the regular media could handle, or any person could handle, in terms of where to place our attention. Usually or typically we follow any pyramids either, but there are geological issues that I think still needs to be addressed before we can be completely certain about the nature of these pyramids. But on the surface, there's no question, especially the large one, the Pyramid of the Sun, and Samir, he showed us around to the various archaeological trenches and so forth, we were there at the same time with a team from National Geographic, and they asked questions that were critical, as you might expect, and he answers very well, but it still remains this. It's not to me 100% clear case yet.
Yeah. I've heard that too. Robert Schock and some of the other geologists have posed, I guess, the same kind of questions. If some parts are natural or whatnot, and some parts I know is apparently underground as well. Did you get a chance to go into some of the cavities underneath that they have there as well?
Yeah, the tunnel system is quite complex, and but I don't think it adds very much. Well, there was some interesting petroglyphs, you might say. Some not writings, but symbols that seemed indisputably human. in origin, and that was interesting to see in these tunnels. And they continue, they work hard, and it's very, there's a bunch of volunteers there, and it's made in. I'm in Toulouse in southern France, and I'm just back from a visit, partly to a course in Torino, but also a visit to the Bosnian pyramids in Bosnia, obviously.
Ah.
And that was quite an exciting adventure, you might say. Bosnia is sort of a country you don't, at least I never thought I would go there, but I did.
Our friend Sam Simir Osmanagic, did you meet with him? And what's your overall impression, by the way, of the pyramids over there, Carl?
Well, I think, first of all, I think he's done a tremendous job, a good job in arguing strongly in favor of his hypothesis. I still think there are a few question marks. It's not an easy, immediate answer, so to speak, but I think the weight of evidence leans in favor of the idea that they are man-made, and which is really very interesting and fascinating. To me, they said that people don't want to recognize this because that would mean that they would have to rewrite all of history and so forth. But I don't really see that. To me, it just would be an addition. I have no problem with the fact that they might be 10,500 years. I even think that is quite reasonable, and I don't see any reason why Bosnia wouldn't have one thing or maybe two things that are the main focus on international media. But this was just too much, and it was really then a very evident beginning of a wave that had a higher frequency, meaning that more things are compressed in a certain time period than ever before. Now, since then, many developments have continued. Throughout this ninth wave, there has been an increase of all kinds of natural disruptions, earthquakes, and the like. Also, there's been a growing and continuing economic destabilization. You might say that, especially in Europe, and especially in Southern Europe, there's sort of been a kind of revolution going on, or that might be a little bit too strong a word, but a sort of a constant movement of protest.
Well, absolutely. Look at Greece, Carl. I mean, that's definitely a revolution down there.
Yeah, it is. And then sometime this spring, I predicted that some of the most disruptive waves in this particular wave are very good spirit, and they seem very happy to contribute, the people that are doing work there.
Absolutely. Interesting hearing more about that from your perspective as well. I hope to go down there myself at one point and take a look, but more work needs to be done. That's what I've understood from the situation as well. Now, Carl, let's shift over a little bit then and begin to focus a little bit on your work. We obviously have the end of the Mayan calendar, according to your calculation here, coming up on the 28th of October this year, 2011. We've also entered into the fifth night of the ninth wave. Why don't you give us a little bit of an update, if you will, on basically where we are and everything? There's so much that have unfolded, Carl, since we last talked with you. Chaos, basically, in various parts of the world. We've had huge earthquakes. We've had this issue of something I know that you've been writing and talking about in terms of both the comets, or Comet Honda and Elenin, Give us a bit of an update, if you will, Carl, on what's going on currently.
Yeah. Well, I think you and I talked before the beginning of the 7th day of the galactic underworld, which would place it somewhere around October of 2010. I don't know. Do you have any immediate recollection of
that? Sounds
what?
about right, Carl. I'm going to look in the archive, but let's go with that for now. Yes.
Okay. Meaning that the 9th wave had not started, and as some of you, the listeners, may know, the Mayan calendar is a system of 9 waves of evolution. And the 9th wave is the one with the highest